we have the pleasure of having in our panel 4 panelists that I will introduce to you. So Jane Stackenbach from Intel. Jane is the Executive Director of the Communication Policy in Intel. Welcome, Jane.
Good morning.
Then we have Patrick van Niftrik from SOA. He's the chairman of the ITU working group on SOA. Welcome, Patrick.
Hello.
We have also Jean-Pierre Faisant. He's the head of communications working group of the Broadcast Networks of Europe. Welcome.
Good morning, Mario. Good morning, all.
And then last but not least, we have Mats Homan from TeliaSonera. Mats is the spectrum manager of TeliaSonera. So welcome, Matt, as well. So we have all the members of our panel, so welcome to all. We will start by giving you some time to make a presentation about what are the most important issues on the agenda of WRC 23, both for Region 1 and globally, from your group point of view. So let's start in the order I introduced you. So let's start by Jane. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. It's actually still very late evening here, so apologies for the darkness in the background. I actually think that the last panel was very informative, and I think what you see is there are different countries with seeking a common framework, but for each of those countries, they do have different priorities, different incumbent services. Germany, for example, is looking at how to move their industries forward. My children in the United States have never seen over-the-air TV, where colleagues in some of the other countries really rely on it. We have different status of wired infrastructure or other types of infrastructure. And somehow within the conference, we have to come up with a common framework that allows these different priorities to be addressed by different countries and make sure that they're doing what they need to for their societies. And as we saw and are still seeing with COVID-19, digital infrastructure is a huge part of that. Connectivity and Wi-Fi used more than ever before. And so it's really important as we look at these studies that we think about ways to come up with a common framework, but allow for these countries to be able to do what they need to at the national level within that framework to really meet the needs of their society. And that includes protection of the incumbent services, but also allowing for innovation and really trying to take conference decisions in a way that recognizes the importance of cross-border interference and deals with it, but still allows the countries to move forward. So as we go through our discussions, we'll get into some of the different agenda items. Obviously Intel will care about 5G and Wi-Fi, but I think it's really important that we also think about how different countries do have different priorities and coming up with a common framework that allows everyone to be able to move their societies forward. And that's all for right now, Mario. I'll be brief. We're running a little behind.
Okay, thank you, Jane. This is appreciated. We'll continue talking, but let's go now to Patrick for his introductory remarks. Patrick.
Yes, thank you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to provide our views on opportunities and challenges for WRC 23. Today, although I'm indeed part of the SOA group, today we'll be presenting the challenges and opportunities from the point of view of the GSC. If you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so just before we come into some specifics of WRC 23, just some general remarks. Of course, there's always been a lot of talk about 5G. The conference, the previous one, decided on a number of millimeter wave bands. We see a lot of countries in Europe implementing 5G in various bands. And of course, that's often very much related to the last mile of it, the base stations, etc. Just want to highlight that from our perspective, for 5G to be truly a global success, it has to be a combination of technologies, a network of networks. So we certainly believe that satellite will have a role to play in that. And how that would work is already written down in a number of ITU and CPT reports that you see referenced in the slide. But of course, we continue to work on that in various other groups, including in 3GPP. Just a few words on the pandemic. I think from the satellite perspective, we have been working hard to ensure broad connectivity and service continuity for all users. As a community, we have been providing support on a number of issues. And if you want to see more details of those, I would refer you to the GSC website or the ESOA website, where you can see those details. Next slide, please. So when it comes specifically to the WRC23, we definitely see a number of opportunities. Mobility has been in the recent years an important driver for the satellite sector in terms of new projects and innovations. And despite the current situation with COVID-19, we do see a long-term potential for this market to be very interesting. What the satellite community has been focused on as well, as you might have noticed, for example, from agenda item 1.5 from the previous conference, is that we try to look not necessarily always to new allocations, but we try to look at existing allocations and see how we could best optimize them, develop a regulatory framework to enable new applications such as eSIMs. So a number of WRC23 agenda items kind of fall into that philosophy. And 3 of them are in the list here. So 115, 116, and 117. 115 deals with GSO FSS Earth stations on aircraft and vessels in the Ku band uplink, in the FSS plan uplink. 116 deals with NGSO eSIMs in Ka band, which is in a way a follow-up to what happened in WRC19 for the GSOs. And 117 deals with satellite-to-satellite links in both Ku and Ka band. So we see these definitely as very interesting agenda items going forward. One example of an interesting new agenda item that looks at the new allocation, and in particular for MSS, is 118, which looks for a number of frequency bands below 4 GHz for narrowband mobile satellite systems. I'm sure in the news you've heard lots about IoT applications being developed from space, and this would fit nicely within that. I think, as was mentioned before, Europe has taken a leading role in a number of these activities, mainly related to the use of aircraft and vessels in the band 12.75 to 13.25, as well as in the case of NGSO eSIMs. Next slide, please. Of course, as always, there will be challenges as well for our community. And those are mainly related to those agenda items where we could potentially see an impact on services that we are providing today or plan to provide in the future. I think it's no surprise that we list here agenda items 1.2 and 1.3 related to IMT in various bands like C-band, downlink, and uplink. And under 1.3, a potential primary mobile allocation in region 1 in the band 3.6 to 3.8. We also highlight here issue 9.1c because it deals with IMT technologies in the fixed service bands, and fixed service bands often have allocations in the same bands as FSS, as satellite. So we will be following that in very much detail. Lastly, just to stress that many countries in the world still rely on C-band. So it will be very important for us to protect those services from those satellite services from mobile deployments in neighboring and adjacent countries. We will be very carefully looking at the in-band studies, but as well at the out-of-band studies, because there are some very important technical elements to take into account, which we need to ensure compatibility going forward. And that will be all from my side for now. Thank you very much.
So we'll continue our discussion in a while. Let's give now the floor to Jean-Pierre for his introductory presentation.
Thank you very much, Mario. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. Did you know that in Europe, the most prominent television distribution platform is the terrestrial broadcasting platform? It reaches 250 million Europeans, and it requires access to spectrum to the 476-94 megahertz band in particular. This is the reason why we are very much interested in the preparation of WRC23, especially in view of the agenda item 1.5. In what follows, I'd like to highlight 3 points. First, the current pictures around the TV distribution. Second, the dynamic in region 1. And third, what is at stake at WRC23. So let's start first with the current picture. Then if you can please show next slide. Thank you very much. So here we have a worldwide map of the countries where digital terrestrial television has been launched. It's in blue. As you can see, it's almost a blue ocean. 91% of the world population is in countries where DTT has been launched, 153 countries worldwide. And in region 1, well, it's about the same, 103 countries with also huge deployment, because typical coverage is 70 to 98% of the population where it has been launched. And the average penetration, that is the number of people who actually receive it, is 45%. And actually for a quarter of the countries, above 65%. So it's a huge success. Now, this is the current picture. Of course, you policymakers have to also assess what's going on and the evolution. So let's move at the next slide, which shows the evolution. And this is the evolution in region 1. Each bar is for each year the launch of new DTT networks in a given country, and in accumulated the population which belongs to those countries. So we can see that DTT has been launched in countries representing 2 billion people in the region 1. There are constantly new projects, and you have to remember also that once you launch it, it takes 5 to 10 years to fully deploy it to have a huge coverage of your country. So the trend is continuing. This is clear. And also, I would like to draw your attention to the title, Terrestrial TV's Surprising Staying Power. This is not a title we invented. This is a quote from Deloitte in their TMT prediction in 2020. And we have to remember that this was done before the COVID virus. And in Europe in particular, we saw the surprising staying power and the surprising unifying power of linear television and digital terrestrial television. Actually, TV viewing time increased by about 1 hour in each country. And we are starting from an European average of 3 hours and 30 minutes daily. So this has increased to reach, in some cases, more than 6 hours per day. This is because in terms when things are difficult, people turn to their linear TV, especially to get news, real-time news without fake news, without no disinformation. And they also are looking for entertainment and shared entertainment. And this has reached actually also the younger population. We've seen this trend altogether. So in summary on this chart, we have a strong dynamic around region 1. So what is at stake at WRC 23? Let's move to the third slide. First message is DTT is essential to region 1. It's associated to strong investment. We've seen how many countries are rolling out DTT. And even for those where DTT has been rolled out for some time, there is major investment to clear the 700 megahertz band and also to modernize DTT to provide better quality, interactivity, and adaptation, for instance, around mobility. In Europe, the 470/694 band is essential for the content and cultural industry, which represents a huge economic, cultural, and employment challenge. And long-term visibility for this access is warranted in the EU UHF decision. But further than Europe, throughout region 1, terrestrial broadcasting is bringing business, social, cultural, and sovereignty benefits. It facilitates the analog switch off in MENA and Sub-Saharan country. And we have to remember, there are still about half the countries which have to complete their analog switch off. So as a conclusion, the key in our view at WRC 23 is the long-term stability for the regulatory stability for the 470/694 megahertz band. This will provide huge benefits in terms of long-term investment, but also in terms of cultural and society benefits. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. And then the final panelist to deliver opening comments is Mats. Mats, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mario, and thanks for being here. Reaching out to you from northern Sweden with a very warm weather today. So for us, if we start, next slide, please. For us, for this session, we had three main questions to respond to, and I'll try to give our view on those. The first one was following the WRC, what are the key priorities and opportunities for us? And for us as a mobile operator, first of all, I would say it's very important to implement what we achieved at WRC 19. It was a very successful conference, and we had many useful decisions in the conference. So we really foresee that we need to implement a regional and national regulation and framework needed for this, including frequency arrangements and so on. And I'm very happy that we yesterday in 5D, ITUR 5D actually agreed the revision of 1036 on this and the frequency arrangements for the millimeter wave bands in the sub-working group level, and hopefully we'll agree it in the full plenary during next week. So other thing I would like to bring up is that we should limit the usage more than necessary. We feel it's very important to get the full performance out of 5G, to get the benefits out of it, and also leave some room for technology to develop. We cannot put too stringent conditions on it, because then it will just be another mobile band not fulfilling the needs and not achieving the performance you can get out of 5G. And also a last word on that we should take care of the possibilities from IMT and 5G will bring. For us, 5G is a multi-purpose network, can adopt a very many different usage and other branches and other applications. So we feel it's very important to take care of that, and that means that we should not fragment the spectrum available to different usage. We should try to use it as a multi-purpose network. Next slide, please. And the second question was then what is important at the 23 agenda, both for Region 1 and globally. And I think it's very clear that WRC 19 identified a large amount of spectrum for IMT with the millimeter wave bands. And they are very suitable for hotspot deployment in dense environments. But for an operator, we also have other areas that we need to bring the service to. And because of that, we need spectrum with a different characteristic for other environments. And for that, we see the mid bands discussed under agenda item 2 as a very important contribution to that. And we see the 6 or 7 gigahertz band discussed as a complement to the 5G core band in 3.5 as we see it. And this is really needed to get the 5G out to other areas, and also to give those less dense areas more feel of the full power of 5G. The other thing I would like to highlight is the review of the UHF band. This is actually the band where we already now have a shortage of spectrum for our rural areas, and this is where we really need additional spectrum. We feel that to give more performance and more capacity to our networks in sparsely populated areas, this is very important and will be, and in particular for the downlink in the system. 1.3, 1.4 are of course of interest for us too, but not at the same stage as these two. And of course, we're looking into the satellite, diverse satellite agenda items 1.15, 1.16, 1.17, and 1.18, but mostly to ensure coexistence with our existing services in these bands. Next slide, please. And this is a picture where I'm just trying to identify how it looks. As you see, we have different frequency bands, and we need different frequency bands for different application and environments. But as you can see, there are two holes in this one between capacity and high performance, and also maybe one in the lower end. So if you move to the next slide, we can see that the 6 gigahertz and below 700 could possibly fulfill those and help to enhance that. Next slide, please. And the final question was then for the conference, will we be talking about 5G? when we reach 23, or is it beyond 5G or 6G? My message to that is I don't think it's very important to conclude on that now, because we would like to have allocations and identification that could be used in a flexible way and let the technology to evolve. And because of that, it's very it's very important to include flexibility in the regulations to allow that. And I think in Europe we mostly have technology neutral licenses, and that will allow for that. Next slide, please. So what is the way forward then? And I would like to report: make use of the INT identification agreed in WRC as soon as possible, should it be, and make it possible to broaden the usage of the full performance of 5G to other environments that we can do today in dense urban by the millimeter wave bands, by adding the more mid-band spectrum to the map. And I also think the last point is very important. I think we really should try to work between industries to ensure coexistence and also take care of new possibilities created by IMT, also for other services. So that I think is very important, if we should try to cooperate on this in a fruitful manner. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mats. So I would like to ask you all, the various panelists, a couple of questions before we go to the questions from the participants. So let's keep the same order and start with Jane. So Jane, you are representing a mobile equipment vendor. So what are the relevant WRC 23 agenda items for your company, and what do you expect as a result of this work?
Thanks very much, Mario. So yes, Intel plays a very big role in providing equipment in both the 5G market as well as Wi-Fi. We'll be closely involved in many of the activities that my colleagues have already talked about, the IMT agenda items, and as well as the satellite agenda items. So the same ones, but for us, it's really important that we think about many of the attributes that we just talked about. Like, how do we enable that common framework? How do we make sure that countries can implement decisions to move forward and make sure the innovation is available? So for us, we want to make sure that there is additional spectrum available for IMT. We want to make sure that there is protection of services, and we also see a very important role for Wi-Fi. So for us, we also want to make sure that there is acknowledgement and making sure that there is also spectrum available for unlicensed services to be able to deploy. So we'll also be watching, for instance, the 6 gigahertz discussions very closely as well. But we do want to make sure that we see the framework in place so that countries can make the decisions and really move their societies forward and take advantage of some of these innovations and connect people throughout the country.
Okay, so what broader spectrum policy context do you see as relevant for this work, and how can the WRC 23 preparatory process take this into account?
Well, I think, as we heard from the last panel, right, it's the regulators really have many challenges to face. They have to be able to operate within the international environment, but still make decisions and enable usage within their country. And that's very, very important. And so when we think about and work in our preparatory studies, we should think about, making sure that we have flexibility in that framework. And as Matt said, we implement those decisions so that the regulators are able to then move those benefits on directly to their societies. And so it is, the purpose of the conference is not, the conference in and of itself. I know we all love 4 weeks of no sleep. I'm preparing right now. That's why it's dark outside. Getting ready for work 23 already. But the truth is, we go to the conference because we need all of our technologies. Everybody here feels like their technology is very important, and they are. It's just the regulators need to be able to do that at the national level as well. And we should be thinking of the conference as making sure that the regulators are able to work within that international framework and do what they need to for their societies. Thanks, Mario.
Okay, thank you, Jane. So Patrick, over to you now. So, well, as you mentioned, the WRC 23 will have again proposals for IMT identifications in bands that also have satellite allocation. So I think you know this scenario from previous conferences. So do you see the similarities or differences in this regard with respect to the discussion we had back in WRC 19?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So it depends how far we will go back in history to see if we see similarities. I think for C-band downlink, we might have to go back beyond WRC 19, and we certainly see similarities in the sense of, well, we expect similar scenarios to be studied, and honestly speaking, I expect similar results, but we have to see, and we will take part in those studies. With respect to WRC 19, of course, there the focus was on the higher bands, the millimeter wave bands. So I think one thing which we will kind of be faced with again is the issue of the AAS antennas. So I can't remember now the definition, but the antennas which are capable of electronically steering. And there's been a lot of discussion at the previous WRC, and frankly, there is still discussion about the antenna patterns and the modeling actually this week during Working Party 5D. And from our perspective, it's very important to understand, well, first of all, to understand the modeling of these antennas in the bands under agenda item 1.2, for example, to see really if there's no unexpected or adverse side lobes that might beam into space. And so those are very important elements to pay attention to make sure we understand them well, we can model them well, and take them into account properly into the studies.
Mm-hmm. So in your presentation, you don't mention anything about agenda item 7, which is always referred to as a mini conference in itself.
Yes.
So you are not concerned particularly about it?
No. We are very concerned, and you know, amongst our interested groups, there are quite some number of people almost dedicated to that. So definitely, this is on our radar screen. It is a bit early, though, in the process to see exactly what issues are coming up. But for sure, we know already that there's some follow-up work to do from the agenda item on the BIU and milestones discussions for the constellations. There's follow-up work to do on that, and we are focused on that. So definitely, agenda item 7 will remain very important, and so we cannot make a promise that this will not yet again result into a conference within a conference in 23.
Okay, well, let's hope it doesn't. So thank you. So Jean-Pierre, now you are kind of the new kid on the block after a very quiet WRC 19 for broadcasters. You are preparing, I'm sure, for a more hectic WRC 23, where there is an agenda item that is really of your interest. So in your presentation, you highlighted the importance of terrestrial broadcasting in countries, as you mentioned. But do you consider also the viewpoint of other countries that have little or no terrestrial broadcasting in the UHF band?
Thank you, Mario, for the question. I think, well, first, we are new. We've been in the block at a few WRCs before, especially WRC 12 and WRC 15, which was not so comfortable, I would say. And even WRC 19, well, we fought a lot just to keep the achieved, I think, agenda for WRC 23, which was a consensus. I'd like to point out that, of course, we are aware that there are some countries, we've seen it's a minority, but there are some countries which do not use DTT. And of course, this has to be taken into account. And as has been mentioned, finding right consensus solution is a true asset of ITU. However, we want to stress that for us, going co-primary, for instance, is not a consensual solution, because we know what that means in the end. That's exclusive for IMT in most cases. And we just don't think that's a good solution. And we are more in favor of solutions like what has been done in Europe, for instance, flexibility option, which allows countries for which there is little market demand for this DTT or other terrestrial broadcasting systems to introduce other services, provided they protect DTT needs. And I think this is possible. And so we are looking for solutions to share really the spectrum. We already do with PMSC. We already do with radio astronomy. We already do it with white spaces in some countries. And we are looking at what 5G broadcast, for instance, could how it could work out with the DTT. So yes, we are, of course, considering the fact that not all countries have the same use, but we also have to consider that the fact that there is a huge consensus around DTT right now that has to be preserved.
Okay, thank you. So I guess you are very busy with the preparation of the conference regarding particularly agenda item 1.5. What is the next important milestone in your preparatory work for the conference?
Well, we are in the study phase, clearly, and I think there's an important milestone, which is the ITUR questionnaire on the use of the UHF band for broadcasting services, either current or foreseen. And we are convinced that the answer to this questionnaire, which will be known at the end of the summer, will probably confirm what I've shown you in the slides, that is that the spectrum is very much used, and this is for the long term.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks very much. So Mats, now over to you. So you represent a operator, and it was very clear from your presentation. Let me just ask you some complementary questions to your presentation. So in agenda item 1.2 that you mentioned, there are proposals for new IMT identification in what they are called the mid-bands. So do you see any alternatives for Europe on how to satisfy the need for more spectrum in that regard?
Well, not really. It's really difficult to find a suitable spectrum, and we can already see now that it's not possible to. The already allocated spectrum, the C-band, is not enough. However, the only possible way forward I can see is enlarge the C-band portion with the 3842 domain, and that would allow for a little bit more, not as much as the 6 GHz band could give, but at least you will have some possibilities to increase the usage and reach regions that today not will have the full performance of 5G, and give them more services and more performance in the network.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So making reference to what Jean-Pierre just said about sharing as a solution for the UHF band, what do you think about the possibilities to find a balanced sharing situation between IMT and broadcasting in that band?
Yes, actually, I agree with Jean-Pierre and many items, and I really think we have to find a way forward on this, not trying to create a new war between the industries. I think there is opportunities there we can find, and we should take a broader look, I think, at the whole 1.5 agenda item and look what is possible to find and share. And as I mentioned also briefly, what we in the first phase looking for is more downlink spectrum. That's where we really have the shortage, and that's maybe would be easier to share with the broadcasting industry in a first phase. And then in the second phase, we could look for uplinks and more uplinks if the broadcasting need decrease. And it's a bit contradictory, because of course this spectrum would be very, very valuable uplink spectrum to complement the higher bands. But the urgent need that we see is for downlink, and we also see that there is a difficult situation in Europe to find that spectrum with quite long licenses for broadcasting operators today. So I think we should have a broader look in this. We haven't settled internally yet what would be the way. Of course, the band N71 band plan for 600 would be the easiest way out, but I think we also should investigate other possible ways to make use of the band in a more recent time frame. Thank you.
Thank you. So before going to the questions from the audience, I wanted to ask you all a general question. If Dan could put up the results of the poll that we saw earlier. Thank you. So you can see there that apparently the protagonistic agenda items for this conference considered by the participants are the UHF band that we've been discussing and the 6 gigahertz band. So apparently the broadcasting and the unlicensed are going to be at the top of the attention, and for once IMT may not be the main topic for discussion. This was also the result of the MENA conference back in February, a very similar result as you can see there. Although there was more for the 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz than for the 6 gigahertz in that particular region. So what reflection do you have in this poll, in the results of this poll? I mean, would this change a bit the profile of the conference, or we'll have just more actors or more topics, continuous topics in addition to IMT identification? So who would like to go first? Yes, Jane?
Thanks, Mario. When I look at the poll, I don't think that there's a sudden difference in the slide went away. So, but the where you see 19% difference and so for 3.3 to 3.8, the 21% versus 2%, and then like the 6 gigahertz, the 19 versus 30. I don't think that there were massive changes in the last few months, although certainly the world has changed quite a bit. But I think it may also come with different priorities and different availability. And so we saw the same thing in the last conference, right? Like which bands were more important to administrations in different areas are a reflection of what may be possible. So it may be that what we're seeing is not that there's a difference in opinion in the importance, it's what may be more attainable in MENA versus within CPT. And certainly I would expect these agenda items to be ones that are, discussed over the next 4 years and trying to come up with solutions. And as we get closer, some of these numbers may change because the solutions seem more attainable or more apparent and in terms of what coexistence would look like and what type of regulatory mechanisms might be in place. So it may be more that the poll results are a reflection of what the priorities are already being different in different regions and which folks are going to put resources into in terms of where they might be able to meet some of this urgent need for spectrum for some of the new applications.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jane. Yes, it's also a different audience, huh? So it's not necessarily only a difference in time. Right. It might be region 1, but it's one is MENA region and the other one is Europe on a wider manner.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So no, it's not the difference between the two that I wanted to highlight. It's the fact that the most important issues or more prominent issues that appear from the poll are not the usual ones from WRC 15 and 19, which might be good. I mean, just to have a different victim at the conference. Okay, so let's start with the questions from the audience. I already have a couple. So let's start first with a question from David Gibb from Policy Tracker. He says that even though it's not an agenda item per se, and it will not lead to any changes to the radio regs, what are the panelists' thoughts on the use of IMT for fixed wireless broadband in fixed service plans? Yes, Patrick?
Yes, thank you, Mario. Well, yeah, what can we say about that agenda item? I think this agenda item, of course, was agreed to put on the agenda for WRC 23. It's not a secret that from our perspective, well, we were not in favor of having such an agenda item. We think that such issues would be best dealt with at the national level. If you want to do a change of technology in your fixed service use, it's probably best to be dealt with at such a level rather than at the ITU level. So from that perspective, yeah, we will follow it carefully. Again, here the question comes in on the IMT, specifically the antennas. How well do they perform? How well can they be modeled? And there are a number of things to carefully study before any change or even any results of studies could be presented to the director of the BR, or to you.
Thank you. Mats?
Yes, regarding fixed wireless access, I think that's a very important component for the future. We are modernizing our network, and in particular our copper network currently, and that will be gone in a few years. And we need technologies to replace the fixed services, the old networks. And here fixed wireless access come into play in a very good position, and we think it could be used in a good manner. However, regarding 901, I don't really see that we need to wait for that. This is a fixed service, and choosing IMT as a technology is just a choice of technology. So from a regulatory point of view, I think we can use fixed applications with different technologies already now. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so next question is from Martin Rotter. He says that there is significant interest from non-MNOs, that means the verticals, in acquiring licensed spectrum to support services and applications that address their specific needs. So how will these desires of this diverse group of spectrum licensees be accommodated within WRC 23, and the regional groups are preparing for it? So this is the use of spectrum by the verticals, not by the operators. Mats?
Well, I can try to respond to this as well. As I mentioned, I think we see 5G as a multi-purpose network, can do many different things. And my problem with that, with starting to diverge in the spectrum in smaller pieces, is that you will lose the possibilities 5G give, and it will make it much more difficult to achieve the performance you can get out of 5G. I hope really that MNOs and the verticals industry could cooperate together to find a solution where it could use the public network for this vertical need in the spectrum. But as we know, we have already seen administration setting aside spectrum for verticals. And of course, you can do that in some places, but if you start to do that too much, it will destroy the performance and the possibilities of 5G, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, the countries that are doing this, and Europe is a pioneer in this, they are assigning some very small portions of spectrum, and on a regional basis. So it's not a very wide assignment that is in let's say a test or a first trial. So I guess that we'll have to see how this works out in order to set a policy for the future that will be wider. Patrick, I have a question from you, from Erika Tejedor from Ericsson. So when talking about 3GPP and the radio regs, do you envision that 3GPP specify standards for eSIM, or what kind of mobility is 3GPP expected to define for satellites?
Okay, thank you, Mario, and thank you very much for the question. So, yeah, the issue of 3GPP, I think we have to distinguish clearly with, of course, the radio regulation side, where we specify the regulatory framework of services and how they can coexist. and the 3GPP side, which is clearly about developing standards. Now, the satellite industry is following that in detail, and we're going to be very interested to see how we can leverage those standards. But I think since we are on a WRC panel here, I think such a topic probably deserves its own panel and might be better to discuss that there in further detail.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So an additional question from Simon Pike. So is identification of spectrum for IMT still as important as it was for the first band of IMT 2000 back at that time? So if it is important for IMT, should it be extended to other applications? So I would interpret this the following way. At the beginning, it was obviously very important to identify bands for IMT in order to roll out the service. Now, after so many years, we are still having this topic in every conference, and it's always a very controversial topic vis-a-vis the other players in the industry. So it's still that important to identify more spectrum as we did back then. So I guess Jane and Mats will have something to say about that.
Well, thank you, Maury. I can try. I think to some extent, Simon is right that there might be not as important as it was from the beginning. From the beginning, it was really important to get the harmonization from the industry to go in the same direction and choose the same bands and so on. And that could, of course, be accomplished outside ITU. Personally, I would not. It would be sad to see that going that way, but that could, of course, be a way that you have a mobile allocation and you could do the harmonization outside the ITU. Personally, I think it would be good if we could find a way forward that we really could keep the harmonization on a global level within the ITU. But there have been discussions also to find easier ways and not have to wait for a conference to do this harmonization, that you just could agree on between the industries which band to harmonize and so on. But as I said, personally, I still think it would be good if we could find a fruitful way forward in ITU to make the allocations and identifications.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Jane?
Yes, thanks, Mario. I'll just add a little bit to what Mats was saying. When Patrick gave his presentation at the beginning, he was talking about flexibility for new applications within the existing service allocations. And if you look, most of the IMT identifications are happening like that within the existing mobile service allocation. So putting aside 1.3, those are within existing mobile service allocations. And so it's the same premise, right? Like there is technology uses, very heavy technology uses that are happening. And for the most part, they are existing within it. I think where you start getting into some of the discussions is not just what Mats was saying about the length of time that it takes, but also whether or not it's a fair situation, right? Like sometimes it seems like, the IMT agenda items, which, as you said, are very controversial and contentious in a lot of the studies, end up with, what appears to be every type of restriction. I think that's where we start getting into discussions over the identification versus not. And so I do think it's important that as we do the studies, that we are fair and balanced, and that we are trying to make sure that we're protecting, but also allowing innovation. So there's a balance there, and it's very important that we try to cooperate and really be fair in the ITU studies and let the new applications go forward as well.
Yes, thank you, Jane, as well. I need to say something here. I think that IMT related agenda items have been controversial over the past conferences because they are mostly, let's say, affecting other services that are either in the same band or in adjacent band. So obviously the controversy comes from the fact that the other industries are, or the other sectors of the industry or segments of the industry are trying to defend what they have and the services they have. And this is one of the principles that we have in ITU, which is to protect existing services. So looking into solutions, we have to look at sharing, or we have to look at some protection levels and things like that, as it was the case in the last conference. The level of let's say, controversy in a conference comes from some kind of exasperation sometimes of the other services. But that doesn't preempt or prevent the conferences from having finished with successful results for the IMT community. And in the past 2 or 3 conferences, I've heard only praise from the IMT community on the results of the conference, and you've had an increasing amount of spectrum allocated each time. So why am I saying this? Because what Mats just said is a bit worrisome, and not a bit, is highly worrisome for me. I mean, harmonizing spectrum globally is not only the aim of the ITU and the ITUR and the WRCs, but it is also the bread and butter of your industry. I mean, you've been able to have a successful deployment around the world and global use of the services because everybody has a mobile terminal that is compatible wherever he or she goes, and the same, let's say, bands are used everywhere, and then the equipment is cheap enough because it's produced for the whole world and not for a niche market, and the services are cheap enough because they are all the same. I mean, the equipment is produced for every market and not for just niche markets. So I think that you will be not only, let's say, having a very bad hit in your reputation by trying to go outside this framework, but also shooting yourself in the foot, I think. In any case, I think that the framework has been successful so far. As I said, the radio regs are there for more than 100 years, 113 to be precise. We've been able to update them and to include the new services without killing the existing services, just making compromises that, although they entail a big sacrifice and sleepless nights, and as Jane said, but I'm sure that we'll continue achieving those results and we'll continue being able to deliver to all players and all stakeholders. So I would very much encourage you to forget these ideas, these crazy ideas of going outside this framework, because it will not serve anybody really in the long term. So that is my message. I mean, I could not be, let's say, more emphatic than that. I mean, I think in that regard.
Mario, I fully agree with what you're saying, and I'm confident that we would find a way forward for this. And as you said, the last conference was very successful, and we managed to create decisions that also give some flexibility for the development and future. And I also think we could see in this case that we actually could share the spectrum. The new in the millimeter wave bands, the AAS system with directable antenna show much better compatibility with the existing satellite service, for example. And I'm very happy to see that, and I hope we can continue to find such way forward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, Matt, for your understanding. I agree with you. And this is what we are doing and will continue to be doing to just have you working with everybody else in order to reach agreement and consensus, even if it's difficult, but we'll get there. And we have shown that this is possible. Okay, so we have a couple of minutes left. So I would think that the best way of using them is giving you some 30 seconds each for a final conclusion. Who would like to go first, or we keep the order? It's easier. Jane, ladies first.
Thanks, Mario. I just wanted to thank my fellow panelists and the audience for listening, and Mario, you for moderating our session today. I do look forward to the preparation and the studies And I hope that at the next conference, we're able to come up with some solutions that allow for the protection of incumbent services, but also allow this innovation to occur now more than ever. Our digital infrastructure is a crucial part of our societies, and we want to make sure that we do have a framework in place so that administrations are able to make sure that those benefits are passed on to their consumers. So I look forward to the next 4 years, and hopefully we come up with this framework that allows the new innovations to get out to the consumers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. Patrick?
Yes, thank you, Mario, and again, thanks for allowing us the opportunity to speak on this panel. I definitely wanted to second your comments on the importance of the ITU. I think for us as a sector, it's extremely important because by definition of the physics of our services, we rely very much on an international framework, and that counts above all. So we're all part of this ITU community. We all have to work it out one way or another, and in the end we will. But of course, we will look after our interests, and we will take part in the meetings and the studies from early morning to late night if needed. And we look forward to working with you, and if possible, in the same room again in the near future. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Jean-Pierre?
Thank you, Mario. Well, I want to thank everyone for this great panel. I think it's interesting to see that our issue around the UHF ban is still a very exciting subject for a lot of people, and we saw that in Abu Dhabi. We saw that this session also. A difference with what we saw at Abu Dhabi is that there were many questions on other subjects, which I think is interesting also, because I think there's no scarcity of subjects in spectrum management. And in terms of concluding for our subjects, I think we heard the spirit of cooperation also. There are some directions around downlink only, which are interesting. And I think it's probably the way forward to understand each other better and to find ways to continue the fantastic industry that we have around broadcasting and media distribution in a way which is perennial in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Mats, over to you now.
Thank you, Mario, and thank you all in the panel. It has been a pleasure to take part of this. And I would like to return to my last slide, more or less, saying that make use of what we are important. Now it's very important to make use of what we agreed in WRC 19 and bring that to the market. And that we also look into the possibilities to bring full performance 5G to more areas than we can do today. And finally, that we work together and find solutions that we all can live with for the future and can find the cooperation. I think there is a good possibility that we find more and more cooperation between the industries for the future also, and let's try to stick to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. So I will need to put an end to the panel by thanking you all for the great panel we've had. I think you were all very good and very, let's say, frank in the discussions, which is much appreciated. I hope that you will continue working towards a successful WRC 23 within the ITUR framework. And I thank again the organizers for having had us today. And finally, thank the participants for their attention and for the questions they raised. And see you soon in another opportunity.